When you was supposed to leave your ex 2 years ago after getting him tatted on your face, now you're having a baby.
A single gunshot, a 19-year-old mother bleeding out, and the father of her 11-day-old twins standing over her body, phone in hand, not calling 911, but his own mother instead. Welcome to Shadows of Crime. I'm your host, and today we're examining a case that exposes the darkest side of intimate relationships. If you're new to our channel, hit that subscribe button now to join our community of truth seekers who refuse to let these stories fade into obscurity. Davonye Cummings should have been celebrating a milestone in her young life, the birth of her twin daughters. Instead, on March 2, 2025, she became another statistic in America's epidemic of domestic violence. But Davonye was far more than a statistic. She was a daughter, a friend, and most importantly, a mother to 4 children who now must navigate life without her. What makes this case particularly disturbing isn't just the timing, though the murder of a woman still recovering from major surgery is horrific enough. It's what happened in the crucial minutes after the shooting that reveals the true character of the man who pulled the trigger. When 34-year-old Terrence Miles stood over Davonye's body, he didn't call for an ambulance. He didn't try to save the mother of his newborn twins. Instead, he reached for his phone and called someone else entirely. This single decision speaks volumes about his priorities in that moment and raises serious questions about his claim that what happened was merely an accident. As we dive into Davonye's story, we'll explore how a young woman born into a cycle of hardship fought to create a better life for her children, only to have that life cut tragically short by someone who should have protected her. We'll examine the warning signs that went unheeded, the system that failed to intervene, and the community left to pick up the pieces. But perhaps most importantly, we'll look at what Davonye's death can teach us about recognizing danger before it turns deadly, because while we can't bring her back, we might be able to prevent another young mother from meeting the same fate. What forces shaped Davonye's path toward this tragic end? And how did a man with 5 felony convictions end up in the position to take her life, just days after she gave birth to his children? The answers reveal a troubling pattern that began long before that fatal gunshot. To understand the tragedy that unfolded in that Oakland apartment, we need to go back to the beginning of Davonye Cummings' story, a story marked by absence and instability from her earliest days. Davonye grew up in a household fractured by the criminal justice system. Her father, mother, and brother all cycled in and out of incarceration throughout her childhood, leaving her without the stable foundation most children take for granted. While other kids her age worried about homework and friendships, Davonye worried about when or if her family would come home. Her social media accounts from her early teens paint a heartbreaking picture of a young girl desperate for connection. Posts with captions like "Free my daddy," "Free my mama," "Free my brother" appeared regularly, a digital cry for a family that circumstances had taken from her. These weren't just casual statements. They were the desperate pleas of a child forced to grow up in the shadow of a system that had claimed nearly everyone she loved. With her primary caregivers absent, Davonye had no choice but to mature beyond her years. Basic survival skills that most teenagers learn gradually under parental guidance, cooking, cleaning, managing a household, became her daily reality out of necessity, not choice. She navigated adolescence largely alone, without the safety net that family typically provides. Then, at just 13 years old, Davonye's life changed forever. In 2019, while most girls her age were navigating middle school social dynamics, she became a mother to her first daughter. This child, born when Davonye was barely a teenager herself, became her anchor in a world that had offered little stability. Friends recall how her entire demeanor would change when she spoke about her daughter, her face lighting up with a love and purpose that had previously been missing. She was the sweetest girl you'd ever meet, especially considering everything she'd been through, one childhood friend told local reporters after her death. Always making jokes, always trying to make others feel better even when she was struggling herself. This resilience in the face of overwhelming odds became Davonye's defining characteristic. Those who knew her described a young woman who refused to be defined by her circumstances, who maintained her capacity for joy and laughter despite the weight on her shoulders. But beneath this exterior strength, Davonye battled depression and the heavy burden of generational trauma. Her social media posts occasionally revealed glimpses of this inner struggle, moments of raw honesty about feeling overwhelmed, abandoned, and uncertain about her future. What's remarkable isn't that Davonye sometimes felt crushed by her circumstances, it's that she continually found the strength to push forward anyway. While many teenagers rebel against authority, Davonye had virtually none to rebel against. While many young adults gradually take on responsibility, she had it thrust upon her all at once. And while many new mothers have their own mothers to guide them, Davonye navigated parenthood largely through instinct and determination. The contrast between the harshness of her circumstances and her persistent hope for a better future reveals the core of who Davonye was. Not a victim, though victimized by systems and individuals throughout her short life, but a young woman determined to create something better for herself and her children. This determination would carry her forward as her family continued to grow, but it would also place her directly in the path of a man whose influence would prove deadly. By the time Davonye Cummings reached 19 years of age, she had already experienced motherhood 4 times over. Following her first daughter, born when she was just 13, she went on to have a second child, and then in February 2025, she gave birth to twin girls via C-section. 4 children before she could legally purchase alcohol, a responsibility that would overwhelm many twice her age. Despite the enormous challenges of raising multiple children as a teenager with limited resources and support, Davonye's devotion to her children was evident to everyone who knew her. Her social media accounts, once filled with longing for her absent family members, transformed into a celebration of her children, their milestones, their smiles, their everyday moments that brought her joy. Those kids were her world, a close friend later told investigators. Everything she did, every decision she made was about giving them a better life than she had. She'd go without food herself to make sure they had what they needed. This dedication to her children made what happened to Davonye all the more tragic, not just for her, but for the 4 young lives left behind, including newborns who would never know their mother's touch. It was during her pregnancy with the twins that Terrence Miles became a significant presence in Davonye's life. At 34 years old, Miles was nearly twice Davonye's age, a man in his mid-30s involved with a teenager. This age gap alone represented a significant power imbalance, but it was far from the only red flag in their relationship. What Davonye may not have fully understood was the extent of Miles's troubled past. Court records reveal that by the time he entered her life, Terrence Miles had accumulated 5 felony convictions. His criminal history painted a picture of a man with violent tendencies and little regard for the law, hardly the stable partner a young mother of multiple children needed. The question that haunts this case is how a man with such a background came to have such influence over a vulnerable young woman. The answer likely lies in the complex dynamics that often characterize relationships with significant age and power disparities. For Davonye, who had grown up without consistent parental figures, the attention of an older man might have initially seemed like the stability she craved. For Miles, a teenage mother with limited resources represented someone he could easily control and manipulate. This toxic combination, her vulnerability and his dominance, created the perfect conditions for abuse. Friends noticed changes in Davonye after Miles entered her life. She became more isolated, her social media posts grew less frequent, and when she did post, the carefree joy that had characterized her earlier content was noticeably diminished. These subtle shifts, recognized only in hindsight, were early warning signs of a relationship turning dangerous. The birth of the twins should have been a new beginning, a chance for Miles to step up as a father and partner. Instead, it marked the beginning of the end. With Davonye physically vulnerable from her C-section and emotionally focused on her newborns, the power dynamic in their relationship shifted even further in Miles' favor. What happened in those 11 days between the birth of the twins and Davonye's death? What tensions were building behind closed doors as she recovered from major surgery while caring for newborns? And most importantly, were there moments when intervention might have changed the course of events? The answers to these questions reveal how quickly a controlling relationship can escalate to deadly violence, and how systems designed to protect vulnerable women and children can fail at the most critical moments. I want to pause here and ask you, our viewers, what warning signs do you see in relationships like this one? Have you ever noticed similar patterns in relationships around you? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your insight might help someone recognize danger before it's too late. As we continue Davonye's story, we'll examine the final days of her life. Days that should have been filled with the joy of new motherhood, but instead led to an unthinkable end. On February 21, 2025, Davonye Cummings was wheeled into an operating room at an Oakland hospital. Hours later, she emerged a mother of 4, having delivered twin girls via C-section. The birth announcement appeared on her social media that evening, a photo of 2 tiny infants, their eyes closed, wrapped in hospital blankets. Her caption was simple: "My angels are here, blessed ×2." What many of Davonye's followers might not have understood was the physical ordeal she was just beginning. A C-section is major abdominal surgery. Doctors cut through skin, tissue, and muscle to reach the uterus. Recovery typically takes 6 to 8 weeks, with the first 2 weeks being particularly challenging. During this time, women experience significant pain, difficulty moving, and are advised not to lift anything heavier than their newborn. For Davonye, this meant she was at her most physically vulnerable in the days following the twins' birth. Simple tasks like getting out of bed, showering, or picking up her other children became painful challenges. She needed rest, support, and care, none of which she appeared to receive adequately from Miles. Her social media activity during these 11 days shows a young mother trying to embrace the joy of her expanding family despite physical pain and mounting tension at home. She posted photos of the twins daily, often with captions expressing gratitude and love. "Can't believe they're mine," read one post. "Worth every pain," said another. But between these celebrations of new life, troubling signs emerged. Posts would appear and then be deleted hours later. Friends reported receiving late-night messages from Davonye that hinted at problems with Miles, though she never explicitly asked for help. If you're watching this video and recognize these patterns in your own life or someone close to you, please don't wait to reach out for help. Like, share, and subscribe to our channel to help spread awareness about these warning signs. Your action today could save someone tomorrow. What investigators would later discover about Miles' behavior during these 11 days reveals a man growing increasingly agitated by the demands of newborn twins and a partner recovering from surgery. Neighbors reported hearing arguments from the apartment, with Miles's voice often dominating these exchanges. One neighbor told police she heard him shouting, "You had kids before, why are you acting helpless now?" just 2 days before the murder. But the most disturbing revelation came from Davonye's phone records. In the 48 hours before her death, she had searched online for women's shelters in Oakland and how to leave safely with children. She had also reached out to a distant cousin, asking if she and her children could stay just for a little while until I figure things out. These digital breadcrumbs paint a heartbreaking picture. A young mother still healing from childbirth, recognizing the danger in her home and desperately seeking an escape route. She knew something was wrong. She was trying to get out. The timing of these searches suggests Davonye had made the decision to leave Miles, a decision that domestic violence experts identify as the most dangerous moment in an abusive relationship. When abusers sense they're losing control, they often escalate to extreme violence in an attempt to reassert dominance. As March 2nd dawned, Davonye Cummings had no way of knowing it would be her last day alive. She fed her twins, posted a final photo of them sleeping peacefully, and sent a text to her cousin that read simply, "I'll call you later today, need to talk." That call would never come. March 2, 2025 began as an ordinary Sunday in Oakland. At approximately 2:15 p.m., multiple neighbors heard what they described as a loud bang coming from Davonye's apartment. One resident who lived directly below reported hearing a man's voice shouting immediately afterward, though she couldn't make out the words. No one called the police, a tragic example of how normalized such disturbances had become in the building. Inside the apartment, Davonye Cummings lay on the floor of her bedroom with a gunshot wound to her neck. The twins were in their bassinet in the living room, unharmed but soon to be motherless. Davonye's other two children were fortunately not home at the time, having been picked up by a family friend the previous day for a weekend visit. What Terrence Miles did next speaks volumes about his character and intentions. Rather than immediately calling 911 to get medical help for the mother of his children, Miles called his own mother. Phone records show this call lasted nearly 4 minutes. During this conversation, he claimed the shooting was an accident, that the gun had discharged while he was checking it. Only after speaking with his mother did Miles finally contact authorities, not by calling 911 himself, but by having his mother make the call. This crucial delay eliminated any chance Davonye might have had for survival, as medical experts later testified that immediate intervention could potentially have saved her life. When Oakland police officers arrived at 2:37 p.m., they found Miles sitting in the living room with the twins. He directed them to the bedroom where Davonye lay motionless. The gun, a 9mm handgun that Miles was prohibited from possessing as a convicted felon, was on the dresser, partially wiped clean of fingerprints. Officers immediately noted several inconsistencies in Miles' account. The angle of the wound was inconsistent with an accidental discharge during gun handling. There were no powder burns on Davonye's skin, suggesting the shot was fired from at least several feet away, rather than during a close inspection of the weapon. Most damning of all, Miles had taken time to clean the gun, but not to call for medical help. As paramedics confirmed Davany's death at the scene, Miles maintained his story about an accident. He showed little visible emotion as officers placed him in handcuffs and read him his rights. The twins, oblivious to the tragedy that had just altered the course of their lives, were taken into protective custody and later placed with Davany's extended family. Let's pause to examine Miles' actions in the aftermath of the shooting, as they reveal crucial insights into his mindset. When faced with a life-or-death emergency involving the mother of his newborn twins, his first instinct wasn't to save her life, but to establish his defense. The 4-minute call to his mother wasn't about getting help, it was about getting his story straight. This calculated response suggests not a man panicking after a tragic accident, but someone methodically creating a narrative to minimize his culpability. The partial cleaning of the weapon, the delay in seeking medical attention, the carefully constructed story, these are the actions of someone thinking about consequences rather than care. Miles was booked into Alameda County Jail on charges of second-degree murder, possession of a firearm by a felon, and child endangerment. The district attorney later upgraded the charge to first-degree murder after forensic evidence contradicted Miles' account of an accidental discharge. The Mercury News would later report that during his initial interview with detectives, Miles repeatedly stated, "I didn't mean to," while simultaneously refusing to explain why he had pointed a loaded gun at Davonye in the first place. This contradiction, claiming accident while being unable to provide a plausible scenario for that accident, further undermined his defense. As news of Davonye's death spread through her community and across social media, the stark reality set in. A 19-year-old mother of 4, just days after giving birth, had been killed by the father of her newborn twins. Her children were now without their mother, her friends without her laughter, and her story, one of resilience in the face of overwhelming odds, had come to a violent, premature end. But the impact of Davonye's death was just beginning to ripple outward. In the wake of Davonye's murder, 4 children were left without their mother. Her oldest daughter, just 6 years old, her second child, and the newborn twins who would never know her beyond photographs and stories. The immediate question of who would raise these children fell to Davonye's extended family, many of whom were already struggling with their own challenges. Eventually, her maternal aunt stepped forward to take custody of all 4 children. Determined to keep the siblings together, despite the financial and emotional burden this represented. As news of the killing spread through Oakland, the community's response was immediate and powerful. Within 24 hours, a makeshift memorial appeared outside Davonye's apartment building, stuffed animals, candles, photos, and handwritten notes covering the entrance. Many who left tributes had never met Davonye personally but felt compelled to honor a young mother whose life had been cut short so violently. 3 days after her death, more than 200 people gathered for a candlelight vigil in her memory. Friends shared stories of Davonye's kindness, her humor, and her unwavering dedication to her children. She used to say that her kids gave her the childhood she never had, one friend told the crowd. She found joy in watching them experience things for the first time. The media coverage of Davonye's murder highlighted not just the tragedy of her death, but the systemic failures that preceded it. The Mercury News published a detailed report on March 19 titled, "I didn't mean to." After killing his girlfriend in Oakland, he told his mom it was an accident, police say. The article examined Miles' history of violence and questioned why a man with 5 felony convictions had access to both a firearm and a vulnerable young mother. Perhaps the most significant response came from the Black Femicide Prevention Coalition, which adopted Davonye's case as a rallying point for their ongoing work. In a powerful statement, they noted, "Davonye Cummings represents hundreds of young Black women killed by intimate partners each year. Deaths that are preventable, predictable, and ignored until it's too late." The organization used social media to spread awareness about Davonye's story, connecting it to the broader pattern of violence against Black women in America. The National Gun Violence Memorial created a dedicated page for Davonye, preserving her memory alongside thousands of other victims of gun violence. Her photo, smiling, vibrant, full of life, stands in stark contrast to the circumstances of her death. As the initial shock of Davonye's murder gave way to grief and anger, questions began to emerge, questions that demanded answers. How had a man with Miles' criminal history been able to obtain a firearm? Why hadn't Child Protective Services intervened given the age gap between Davonye and Miles, which suggested their relationship began when she was underage? What resources might have helped Davonye escape before violence turned deadly? These questions point to a troubling reality. Davonye's death wasn't just the result of one man's actions on one day, but the culmination of multiple systemic failures over years. Her murder didn't happen in isolation. It happened in plain sight, with warning signs visible to anyone paying attention. And that raises the most haunting question of all. Who was paying attention? Davonye Cummings' story is not just a tragedy to be mourned, but a lesson to be learned. Her death represents a cascade of missed opportunities for intervention, moments when different choices, different systems, or different responses might have altered the course of her life. Early intervention begins with recognizing vulnerable youth. Davonye's first pregnancy at 13 should have triggered comprehensive support services, not just medical care, but educational support, counseling, and family intervention. Young mothers like Davonye need more than prenatal vitamins. They need pathways to independence and stability. The significant age gap between Davonye and Miles highlights the critical need for protection against predatory relationships. When a 34-year-old man pursues a teenager, particularly one already vulnerable due to her circumstances, this represents a power imbalance that demands scrutiny. Schools, healthcare providers, and social services must be trained to identify these dynamics and intervene appropriately. Community awareness and bystander intervention could have made a difference in Davonye's case. Neighbors heard arguments but didn't call authorities. Friends noticed concerning patterns but weren't sure how to help. We must foster communities where people understand the warning signs of domestic violence and feel empowered to act not after a tragedy, but before it occurs. Gun violence prevention represents another critical layer of protection. Miles, as a convicted felon, was legally prohibited from possessing a firearm, yet he obtained one with apparent ease. Stronger enforcement of existing gun laws, combined with community-based violence interruption programs, could help keep weapons out of the hands of those most likely to misuse them. Support for young mothers must be comprehensive and accessible. Davonye was recovering from a C-section while caring for newborn twins and 2 other children, a challenging situation for anyone, let alone a teenager with limited resources. Postpartum support services, affordable childcare, and practical assistance could have reduced her isolation and dependency on Miles. As we conclude Davonye's story, I ask you to consider how you might apply these lessons in your own community. Do you know the warning signs of domestic violence? Are you familiar with local resources for those at risk? Would you recognize when a young person needs intervention? Share this video to spread awareness about the intersecting issues that led to Davonye's death. Follow our channel for more stories that illuminate social issues and inspire change. Most importantly, if you see someone in a situation similar to Davonye's, don't wait to reach out. Your action today could prevent a tragedy tomorrow. Davonye Cummings' life mattered. By learning from her story, we honor her memory and work toward a world where young women like her can thrive, safe from violence and full of possibility. Davany Cummings' life was cut tragically short at just 19 years old, but her legacy continues through her 4 children.